we are basically working on waste and water issues from the technology and policy perspective. And within the waste, we have a very big program, and one of the small components is e-waste. And under the e-waste, we are developing or providing the guidelines, training materials for capacity building, and that's basically to cover the e-waste inventory within cities and within countries, but we mainly focus on cities, and then also the guidelines on the e-waste management system. And the third set we produce is on the take-back system, and this year we are looking on the private sector participation. So that will be the fourth one coming. And then we also have the demonstration projects, how to use the guidelines. So we build the capacity of the local teams comprising of the local governments, national government, and the private sector within the cities there. So first project we did in Phnom Penh, and the next project is already in process from the Malaysian government, and we are now looking for some funding, and then we'll start in the Malaysia there. And then we have the training workshops every year in Osaka. And this year we are going to have a policy dialogue in July on the private sector participation, and that will be in Osaka. So e-waste is basically one of the components of our overall waste management project, where our major focus is on the integrated solid waste management, which we are doing in all the 3 continents with many cities there. And you can find all the information on the waste related projects, whether it be the integrated solid waste management project, our major project, or e-waste, waste plastics, waste agriculture biomass, and so on. So this diagram is clickable, so you can click anywhere, you can find the data, you can find the guidelines, you can find the project reports, so everything is in public domain. So now let's start our presentation for today. And when we look on the history of waste management, the last century, the focus was to remove the waste, to reduce its impact on the public health, on the environmental resources like water bodies, soil, and so on. So that was all the focus. Landfills, collection systems, everything was designed based on this. But now when we move to this century, we saw a lot of focus moving on the resource recovery from the waste. Waste is now considered as a resource. So if you look on the businesses, recycling businesses, or even the eco-designing of the components, a lot of emphasis is on the reuse, material recovery, and so on. Rare metals is becoming a political issue, let's say, between, for example, Japan and China. The energy costs, when I was doing a Maseru project, that time $150 a barrel. So that means transporting the recyclables from Maseru to Johannesburg was costing huge. So to reduce the cost of transportation, we introduced at least the primary sorting, washing, cutting, and baling, so to reduce the transportation cost per ton of the waste. So that means we are looking or converting waste into the energy. So resource management with perspective to the material security, with perspective to the climate change, like complementing the use of fossil fuels and so on. So this is where our major focus is. And that's all about today's presentation of the resource management from the waste, or e-waste from today's point of view. So when we do the projects on e-waste management, or to be general in the waste management, what are the prerequisites? What we look for? Because we work with the cities, involving the national government and city governments, and also the other stakeholders. We don't bring the consultants, we rather build the teams in the cities comprising of the governments, private sector, universities, and so on. So that's where, what are the prerequisites? High-level support. If we don't have a support from the city mayor, from the national government, we don't walk in to start with. But also we look on the election schedule, to be honest. If elections are due in months, we wait, because usually if a next government is coming, they try to undo or slow down the progress. So that high-level support is very, very important or key there. Then local project team, as I mentioned, that we don't work with the consultants. Suppose in Maseru, we had a project team from the local national government and the local government, and then we involved the University of Cape Town there, and we built the capacity of University of Cape Town. They were also partners in Nairobi project, where we again worked with the City Council Nairobi, involving the Jammu Kenyatta University and University of Nairobi as well. So we tried to build the local project teams, which are there forever, and they can easily replicate the projects in different cities. Then political and community support. All the stakeholders, whether it be NGOs, universities, private sector, they should be on board. So even in China, highly centralized country, when we did a project, everyone was on board, and that's where the success of the projects was there. Cooperation, again, from all the, not only the stakeholders, but also all the international players. Because if you look on the eWest, you can find so many international players. UNIDO is there, UNEP is there, World Bank is there, JEF is there, you name it. Again, you find the bilaterals, like Impal is there, GIZ is there, JICA is there, and so on. So you need to work in a more conducive environment, not to replicate, not to duplicate. So try to improve the efficiency of your efforts working together, which is quite challenging, but we have to do it. And then, last but not the least, these projects should be the part of the vision of the government, of the political system. If they are not part of the vision, we are not going anywhere. So you have to look on the vision or mission statements on the public health, on the employment, on the environmental protection, and so on, to see how you fit in within that vision and the mission for the political governments. So the process for our projects, as I mentioned, first we start to build the teams and then train them. We already have a guidelines. We have a guidelines on the eWest inventory. We have the guidelines on eWest management. We have a guidelines from Basel Convention. We have guidelines from everywhere. So we try to bring to see how we can utilize our or others' guidelines to build the capacities of the team. Because all the project steps, starting from the inventory, the assessment of the current systems of management of eWest, and then looking on the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders, setting the targets, identifying the issues of concern from the stakeholders, and looking on all these data sets to come up with the more comprehensive solutions or interventions, or what we call the plan, is basically we build the training teams to carry out all these tasks by themselves. Then to involve everyone in and to let everyone know what's going on, awareness raising and political and community support is the second step. So these project teams, when they are quite capable, then they try to raise the awareness as their first activity. And then second activity is they produce the baseline reports by collecting all the information, all the data. I'll show you the example how we did for Cambodia. So there's baseline reports basically on inventory, looking on the quantification and characterization with the future trends of eWest, and then also the assessment of the current eWest management systems, whether environmentally sound or unsound, whatever is on the ground, you need to capture to make a better. And then each target has a price tag, whether it be a policy target, like a target for 100% collection, whether it be a target for eco-designing, whether it be a target for resource recovery. So all these targets needs interventions, whether policy intervention, technology interventions, or voluntary interventions, but all those interventions have implications, economic implications, environmental implications, and the social implications and technical implications. And those implications are translated into the stakeholder concerns. So how to identify those concerns. That's the next stage. And based on this, we come up with the interventions or to improve the current system. It's not to bring us some foreign system, but just to bring the improvements in policies or enforcement, technologies, or voluntary actions, and so on. And based on that plan, we also try to do the training and demonstration activities to build the confidence of the local stakeholders and the governments in the plan so they can carry on the plan forward. So basically, these steps I will elaborate in these slides. The training materials, as I mentioned, that initially for all the projects, whether it be e-waste, integrated solid waste management, waste plastics, waste agriculture biomass, whatever we do, we come up with the guidelines. And if the guidelines are already available, we don't try to duplicate. But in this case, we work with the cities basically. So we try to use those guidelines to modify those to the needs for the cities. So then we came up with the e-waste inventory guidelines as well as with the e-waste management system. And if you look on this, the major issue in most of the countries is still their definition of e-waste. So try to bring an understanding at least. How do they define e-waste? That's very critical issue. Because there can be if we are in Cambodia, for example, the project we say, there's no producers. It's all like being imported through legal or illegal and being sold the goods in Cambodia. So the definition for here, there's no any argument from the producers for Cambodia because they don't have EPR for most of the goods being sold in Cambodia. But if we move to Thailand next door, there are many international producers there. Then the definition of e-waste changes. Now, for example, Thai government, they wanted to come up with the upfront tax for the producer to sell any goods. But producers refuse because they are producing in Thailand, but the Thai market is hardly 15% share. They sell in Singapore, in Malaysia, in other countries. So the definition for them is quite different than what Thai government is thinking. And again, Thai government wanted to introduce eco-designing, but again, the producers refused because they think it should be on the ASEAN region basis where they have 80-90% of their market rather than just a Thai design. So it's quite a tricky challenge even to start with the e-waste definition there at the city level and with support from the national governments. So then we're looking on the assessment of the markets. Again, if there are producers, if there are importers, to the retailers, to the first user, to the second-hand users, to the refurbishment shops, and going more into the first level of recycling, like cutting the wires to get the copper, to the second level, or even to the third level, like using the cyanide to recover gold and so on. So having the inventory of everything is another quite challenging task, but we try to do that. And similarly, when we look on the management side, this involves financial management. This involves the regulations, involves the institution roles, like what's the role of the customs, what's the role of Ministry of Environment, what's the role of the city government, who's responsible for e-waste management. Looking on the technologies, the current technologies, whether it be cyanide for the gold or whatever they are doing, to know that. And also what is the roles and responsibilities in the current system, if any, for stakeholders. So again, you need to chalk down all the steps of e-waste management, starting from the imports or production, the goods. So once training is done, then we start the high-level awareness raising, involving the ministerial levels, mayors, and so on, because without the strong political support or figures upfront, it's difficult to bring stakeholders on board. So we need to have very high level participation in awareness raising workshops. It's not only about the information or knowledge, but it's also to see who is leading the activity. Very important in most of the countries. Then, as we move on to the baseline studies, then we don't provide the training at once for all the manuals. We have a training, then do the baseline study for inventory, again have a training on the management systems, do the baseline study on the management system, have a training on target setting and stakeholder concerns, do that and have a training on the e-waste management plan, so on. So basically training and the practical things go hand in hand. So this is an example again from the NOMPAN, where you have a national government, all departments, relevant departments, local government, universities, training and field training, and so on. And then have a practical, like to collect the data from the field. So you have a questionnaires, you have a laboratory testing, you have everything, and that really needs a lot of work and a lot of support. Again, without the government support, I don't think it's possible, even highly trained teams, to go and find data. You need the support from government. You need a word out there. That's very, very important. And then, as I mentioned, that we try to have inventory even from the goods, new goods, down to the third level of recycling. So you have to have a tracer tracking for all the goods, whether it be a televisions, mobile phones, whatever. So for each good, we develop the models or scenarios to check where and how the things are happening. And this also brings us the management information on the management system as well. And then you map the markets. Where are the new goods? Where are the second-hand goods? Where are the recyclers or first-hand recyclers or the third-level recyclers, and so on? In most of times, the third level, like those who are using cyanide and so on, they are not in the cities. They are just far away from the cities, but this is from the city map. So basically, here you can go up to the first level of recycling, where they are cutting the wires to get the copper and so on. And again, using the GPS, we try to bring, like this is a Phnom city, what's going on, what activities within that, and what are the components, like you see air conditioners, mobile phones, refrigerators, televisions, and so on. So you can easily know where and what is going on. So based on that data, and based on the future projections with the GDP, with the access to the information or globalization, or looking on how the needs and demands are being created, and what is, because in developing countries, it's not a saturation model yet, that every new television does not replace the old television. It's more of a penetration model, that all the working televisions, suppose in Cambodia, will go to the rural areas or to the poorer community unless they are dead. So looking on that penetration model and looking on the GDP others, we try to come up with the different scenarios that how much of e-waste or components are coming into the waste streams in the different years to come up with the solutions. Then based on all this, we are preparing the plan. And basically, plan is a set or improvements in the current system in the technologies, whether it be a collection technology, whether it be a technology for resource recovery or technology for recycling. So those technologies, and then looking on the policies, whether it be a policy for the take-back system or collection system, whether it be a policy for recycling, whether it be a policy to have a more of a two countries agreement, like in Cambodia if the feasibility is not high. So to looking on those policies and also the financing as I mentioned, the Thai example that they wanted to charge upfront, but then most of the companies objected that, okay, we pay you money, that means we increase or raise the price of our goods in the market, so we further lose our market share to the unbranded goods. And then also we cover the e-waste cost for unbranded goods coming into the e-waste stream. So that's one way of looking on the financing. Or other ways in Japan, where I live now for work, that we only pay when we discard a good. So then it's my decision. If my fridge is working, I want to continue for 2 more years, or I need a new big size fridge, more energy efficient fridge or whatever, then I pay 5,000 yen or 7,000 yen as a consumer at that time. So there are different models. So looking on those, how we have a policies for those models. Then voluntary measures. This is very important. If we look on the history of, especially in Asian countries like Japan, most of the regulations, they started as a voluntary measures. First to build the confidence. And then they were translated into the regulations and had an enforcement there. So based on all this, for each step, starting from the collection, storage, resource recovery, and recycling, or final disposal of waste, at each stage, technologies, policies, voluntary measures, then how to come up with the detailed projects for each stage. So there you come up with the take-back systems. You can come up with more of government-led storage systems, because the countries like Cambodia, they don't have a strong private sector and so on. So those are translated into the detailed schemes here. So that's called the plan document for the Phnom Penh city. And based on those detailed schemes, again, we have to go into the further of the SWOT analysis for specific schemes. Let's say extended producer responsibilities, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses for that, and what are the opportunities and threats, and based on that, doing the stakeholder workshops to come up with the proper EPR systems with the country having a different types of producers, retailers, and so on. It's very important, because there's no universal model. As I mentioned already, the difference of Cambodia and Thailand. So based on that, we come up with the business models. This is the conventional model. This is the public-private partnerships model. And this is a APR model, purely private sector model. So what are the chances in Cambodia that was analyzed? And based on that, for the public-private partnership, as I mentioned, that there's so far no any history or model for PPP, not only for e-waste, for any waste. Like if we go to the Philippines, for example, they have a history. They had a first history for the public-private partnerships for the electric power. Then they had a water. Then they had a waste management in general. So if they have a history means they have a regulations. Like the Philippines, they had regulations from the parliament on a PPP. Then it's much easier to introduce that. But in a countries where there's no history, there's no regulation so far, and any other form of the PPP, be in ports or any infrastructure projects, it's quite challenging. But still, we try to come up with a sort of a solution to look on that, to see if 20–40% of the project's costs can be contributed by the government in order to make it viable. Like in China, in one city when we asked government to pay in kind, like pay the land. So they provided the land. And there was a group, private sector and government have a public-private partnership, but then the operational group was basically purely private sector to make it efficient. So you come up with the more of a local, and in China we don't call it a public-private partnerships, we say marketization. That was the word we introduced to avoid the conflicts between the sort of their government agenda on the capitalism and so on. So you have to be more creative and looking on the user fee and service fee, that how it's possible. Because again, in Indonesia, for example, the user fee was so small that even the overhead cost to collect the fee was more than what you earn as a revenue. So then either you need to see how you integrate the user cost in other costs like a water bill or electricity bills, or you try to ask the NGOs to bring the money and you pay small commission on the top of that to reduce the overhead costs. So also there are more challenges to introduce this. But again, when you're working in a field, you talk to people, and with experience, you can do it. So recommendations for today, I will read. Multi-stakeholder support should be garnered through awareness raising campaigns and dialogue. So because, as I mentioned, that's awareness raising is very, very important, especially if led by the high-profile people from private sector, from governments, and so on. And then interagency support.